everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Not Podcast. I'm Michael Mandel, and I'm here with Alie Baumann, who leads the Comstack Real Estate Intelligence Team. And the reason why we're doing a special edition today is because today is Election Day, and Alie and her team put together a special report on the impact of the presidential election on federal real estate. And so specifically, this report looked at the impact of the various administrations, whether it's the election of Trump or Kamala Harris in the White House, and how that would impact federal office workers being back in the office, and what the occupancy trends will be from that. So we're going to dig into that a little bit today and see which president would be better for Washington, D.C. real estate, government real estate generally, and how that's going to impact commercial real estate. So let's dig into it a little bit and see where we go from here.
Sounds good.
So the first part of your report talked a little bit about the status quo, right? So where are we right now? How did we get to where we are as far as the current levels of occupancy of real estate in D.C., and what is that status quo?
Yeah, so obviously it is Election Day. Thanks for the reminder, Michael. So we wanted to look at, there's obviously a lot that could be impacted by this election, but specifically D.C., there's been a lot of talk about are federal government workers back in the office? What is their policy? How does it compare to the rest of the U.S.? And this is especially a big topic because so much of Washington, D.C.'s office market is federal government workers as well as state and local. So we thought it was really important to see what has happened, what has been the current state, and where might we go from here with a new administration. So we found that as of late 2023, there is a rule that federal employees are typically required to report in person only twice per biweekly pay period. Obviously, that's not a very high number, and this is impacting office occupancy. So the numbers that we've seen quoted is that some government offices are operating at just 25% capacity, or others report to the office more, so it might be higher, like 40 to 50%. So there is a loose rule, but nothing really official with what the federal government is requiring of their employees.
Got it. Has there been any trend recently as far as that changing, or has that been relatively status quo as of late?
Yeah, I think, it all started last year, May 2023, when the public health emergency was officially over. So that's when the federal government started to think, we need to get people back in the office. We need to create some more accountability in that area. So in August 2023, the White House Chief of Staff at the time directed federal agencies to ramp up in-person attendance. But, we can see that they have mixed kind of reports on how many people are actually going, and there seems to be a divergence across certain federal agencies, with some reporting more or less. We actually pulled the official rates of telework that the federal government itself puts out, and we can see that the average rate of telework, as they call it, is like a 1980s term to me, but is higher than full-time workers overall in the United States.
And then there was this federal Use It or Lose It Act that you mentioned in the piece as well. Could you speak a little bit on that and what that means for going back to the office?
Yeah, so we kind of wanted to do a deep dive of what has happened since that White House Chief of Staff announcement, and there's been, and I don't even think we covered all of them, but there's been various legislation that has been brought up, from things where they want to, understand just the sheer level of remote work. They want to understand how much real estate is being used, and then also acts that try to raise the level of working in office and make it sort of a broad mandate, especially if you are getting paid Washington, D.C. pay rates and that you're working remotely. So the federal Use It or Lose It leases called the Full Act. This was a bill that was brought up by actually a Democratic and a Republican House of Representatives. So this requires federal agencies to report their monthly occupancy rates and try to return any office space that they're not using. And that passed in March 2024.
Got it. So where do Harris and Trump come out on this as far as getting people back to the office and their take on what they'd like to see?
Yeah, so there's so much in either candidates and what they offer the American people, and I can't say that there's like an official part of each candidate's what they're proposing, but in general, the federal government, regardless of who has been in an office in the past, has known that they have too much real estate and they need to streamline their real estate costs and understand more about their occupancy. So kind of how it breaks down, candidate by candidate, on just the sheer number of federal employees. Harris's campaign has indicated that they would likely keep federal employment at a level similar to current levels, whereas the Republican administration has signaled that they might reduce headcount. In addition, they have also, and this happened at the past time that Donald Trump was in office, is that they had a push to try and relocate headquarters out of DC and have a move towards decentralization. That not every federal agency needs to be fully concentrated in the Washington DC area. So obviously, all of those things could have impact on headcount. In terms of policy on remote or hybrid work, the current administration, Joe Biden's administration, understands that it is difficult to maintain or hire more people if they have a different policy that many private sector employees have. So they haven't signaled that they will try to bring back employees at a much higher rate than is currently happening, whereas Republicans have erred more on the side of we need to be bringing back people more to the office in higher levels.
Got it. Although it does sound like, if anything, the government's falling behind the private sector, right? It doesn't seem like they are simply competing with the private sector, because I think two times every 2 weeks or something like that?
Yes.
It's not exactly, I think, where the private sector is at this point, but it certainly seems like a mixed bag, right? So you've got Harris wanting to keep, public sector jobs roughly the same. Trump will probably reduce them, but Trump would probably be okay with moving some of these government agencies to different locations.
Yes.
Harris would likely keep them in DC. So depending on the administrations, there's different movements that would move workers in or out, I guess, depending on the situation. And
right.
I suppose, but I think also there's been some signaling that Trump would be more interested in getting people back in the office, I've been seeing, than Harris, right?
Yes. So, it's difficult in the end because some checks in one column could mean better things for the DC office market, whereas the other administration could also mean something better for the DC office market. So it's a little bit challenging to say. And another part of this is that there's been a lot of debate about specific agency headquarters and should we build a new headquarters and spend significant capital to, relocating. There's been a long debate over the new FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigations headquarters. Like, do they want to be downtown, move to Maryland, relocate to Virginia? So whoever is in office next will have a big impact on decisions like that for these agencies that employ thousands of people in the Washington, D.C. area.
Right. In the report you mentioned, I think a huge expiration from NOAA, right? The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, I think, was a really big one. And that was, a million square feet or so?
Yeah. So another thing that we looked at is, and we've talked about this in other reports, Michael, is that a lot of tenants, COVID was, growing up 5 years ago, right? But a lot of tenants still haven't made their sort of like post-COVID, post-hybrid remote work decision on what are they going to do. Are they going to maintain their footprint? Are they going to potentially grow? Or are they going to reduce? So we looked at what are some upcoming expirations. We found that over 1/4 of DC's office space in general will expire by 2026. But speaking to how much government is of that, government sector leases are 42% of that number. So this is why this conversation is important, because whatever these government tenants do is going to, have a big impact on vacancy, which is already fairly high, in DC. And so, some upcoming expirations that are big are NOAA, as you mentioned. There's also some significant ones from the United States Department of Justice, National Institute of Health, and these are all things that we covered in our report.
Got it. Yeah, and as I recall, also when you're talking about GSA leases, the government also has pretty liberal rights around termination of leases as well, which can have some real impact if there is a real desire to pull back on a lot of these leases too, right?
Yeah, from my understanding, they have a bit more flexibility there that may exist in other private sector office leases, and that they may be able to reduce or leave their lease early. We looked at the average lease term for leases that have been signed, since 2020, and this would be like the length of the lease. So in general, in the office market, there was a dip in average lease term during that strongest period of uncertainty, 2020, 2021. And we've seen recently that the average for the government leases that have been done have come down, a little bit. So that may be a little bit of wanting more flexibility to change their footprint or to move or to reduce occupancy at a future date.
Got it. So what's your takeaway? It seems like I think when I look at the final chart, which was seemed to sum it up pretty nicely, this nice blue and red chart in the report that nicely divides between the Republican red and the Democrat blue. It seemed to show very much a mixed bag.
Yes.
But what would be your takeaway here? What do you think is going to happen?
Yes.
And who's going to win the election also?
Yeah, I'm going to remember on that one. Yes, my ode to politics was having the blue for the Democratic side and the red for the Republican side. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's a little bit hard to tell because to the extent where, Donald Trump may bring more employees back to the office, he may also reduce staff and reduce the headcount for federal agencies and or move them away. On the other hand, the Democrats are less likely to do that in terms of reducing the number of employees that work at federal agencies today. But, they also are more supportive of remote and hybrid work, which may further push the GSA to keep reducing, footprint and reduce costs and therefore, taxes for the American taxpayer.
Got it. Well, it'll be interesting to watch, and I think we'll all be watching the election closely, I'm sure, and following the real estate market closely as a result coming out of it. So I'm sure we'll have more takeaways as the days, weeks, and months follow. So we'll follow up on this as we get more insight.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be an interesting one in many ways.
So thank you, everybody. And if you enjoyed this, then please make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and TV, and maybe the phone book, and also
You can write us letters.
Carrier pigeon would
Yes,
probably be a
that
good
also
way to
works.
subscribe as well. Yeah, perfect.
works.
That'd be great.
All those ways, please
Yeah,
subscribe.
perfect.